Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that has been hidden in plain sight for more than half a century. A story that was once locked away in government archives, quietly classified and only partially revealed decades later. It is known as the Adam and Eve story, a small but powerful book written in 1966 by Dr. Chan Thomas. The book was said to contain knowledge of Earth's past, present and perhaps its future. Knowledge so unsettling that the CIA decided to restrict access to it for nearly 60 years. Why? Because at its heart lies a theory that suggests Earth's history is not a steady line, but a repeating cycle. A cycle of creation and destruction. A cycle where civilizations rise, thrive, and then fall, wiped away by forces far greater than themselves. Tonight, in the calm of the evening, we will slowly and peacefully unravel this mystery together, not in fear, but in reflection. We will explore the history of the book, the science and speculation within it, and the myths and truths that surround it. This will not be a journey of panic, but of quiet curiosity, an opportunity to let the mind drift across time, from ancient floods to future possibilities. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Book. Imagine for a moment a modest book published in the mid-1960s, just 57 pages in length, small enough to slip unnoticed onto a library shelf. Yet within its pages, the author claimed to hold a key to understanding the greatest mysteries of Earth's past and the catastrophic patterns that shape its future. This book was the Adam and Eve story, written by Dr. Chan Thomas, a man trained as an engineer, a thinker, who seemed equally drawn to science and speculation. The title itself is curious. It suggests beginnings, endings, and the repeating cycles of humanity. For Thomas, the name was not chosen lightly. He believed that Earth's history had been wiped clean many times before, forcing humankind to start again, much like Adam and Eve at the dawn of creation. But soon after its publication in 1966, the book was pulled from circulation. The CIA classified it. Not just a chapter, not just a reference, but the entire manuscript. Why would a short book written by an engineer be considered dangerous enough to hide from the public? We only learned of its existence decades later, when a portion was quietly declassified. But even then, only 57 pages were released. According to some, the original was much longer, 284 pages. The version made public had been, in the CIA's own words, sanitized. Entire sections removed, stripped away as if to ensure that the most sensitive details would remain hidden. This leads us to a haunting question. What knowledge could be so dangerous, so destabilizing, that it must be concealed for generations? Thomas's central idea was that Earth is not as stable as we imagine. Instead, he believed our planet periodically undergoes sudden, catastrophic pole shifts. Not the slow, gradual drift that scientists measure over millions of years, but abrupt, violent changes, events that could unfold in less than a single day. He wrote of cataclysms that scoured the land, swallowed cities, and plunged advanced civilizations into silence. He spoke of a world reborn, not once, but many times. According to him, humanity today is not the first advanced civilization, but perhaps the sixth, or even more. Each reset pushed us back to the beginning, erasing most memory of what came before. The very idea unsettles the mind. It is not a comforting thought, but tonight we will explore it with calm reflection. After all, history, whether myth or fact, is not meant only to frighten us. It is meant to teach, to warn, and to remind us of the fragility and resilience of life. To better understand this hidden book, we must first explore the scientific and historical roots of the theory it presents. Because while Dr. Thomas may have written with a speculative tone, he was not the first to suggest that Earth's crust could shift, and he was not the last. Others before him, some even supported by the great Albert Einstein, had entertained the same possibilities. And so, before diving deeper into the classified words of the Adam and Eve story, we will first turn back to the man who inspired much of Thomas's thinking, Charles Hapgood, and his idea of Earth's shifting crust. Smoothly we move on, the next quiet step in our slow, deliberate exploration. Settle deeper into your seat, breathe slowly, and let the candlelight of curiosity glow softly as we trace the life and ideas of the man whose thinking became a foundation for later, more dramatic claims. Chapter 2. Charles Hapgood and the Shifting Crust. There are people whose ideas arrive like small ripples, and others whose words become stones dropped into a still pool, sending concentric circles outward for decades to come. Charles Hapgood was the kind of thinker whose stone landed and kept the water moving. His voice, earnest, investigative, and at times stubbornly hopeful, reached across mid-century scholarship and into debates that still persist today. Picture Hapgood in a modest study, a pile of yellowing scientific journals at one side, maps spread like constellations across a table. He was not a household name akin to the greats, but he was a careful observer, a teacher, a writer, someone fascinated by the traces left behind on Earth, the striations in bedrock, the scattered boulders called erratics, and the puzzling shapes in antique maps. From those fragments he began to ask a large, unsettling question. Could the outer shell of our planet, the crust, slip in mature, sudden motions, carrying continents and climates with it in a relatively short span of time? Hapgood's idea, often called the crustal displacement hypothesis, differs from the modern theory of plate tectonics you may have learned about. Plate tectonics imagines a slow ballet of continents, drifting, colliding and rearranging over hundreds of millions of years as lithospheric plates ride atop convecting mantle. Hapgood proposed something more abrupt and dramatic. The solid outer shell, the crust and lithosphere together, might at times glide as a single unit over the more plastic mantle below, changing the geographic positions of the poles by tens of degrees in a geologic heartbeat. Where continental drift speaks in epochs, Hapgood's idea spoke in the scale of human memory. He offered a plausible-sounding physical trigger, the uneven accumulation of massive polar ice sheets. Imagine the northern latitudes, layered with ice and snow grown heavy over thousands of years. If the distribution of that mass became sufficiently asymmetric, heavier on one side than the other, the delicate balance of rotational forces could, according to Hapgood, be disturbed. The added weight would create centrifugal stresses. If conditions allowed the outer shell to decouple, even slightly, from the underlying mantle, the shell might shift to rebalance the forces. The poles, he suggested, would migrate across the globe, dragging entire climatic zones along with them. This imagery is cinematic. Great ice-sculpted plates, creaking and slipping, global climates reoriented like stage lights swung to a new angle. Yet the human mind is drawn to narrative, and Hapgood gave one: maps of forgotten coastlines, legends of deluges and lost cities, geographic anomalies that hinted at prior orders now erased. He pointed to old charts, some drawn from sources older than the age of modern navigation, that seemed to record shorelines different from our present-day maps. he highlighted peculiar patterns of erosion and sedimentation, puzzling distributions of flora and fauna, and traces of ancient glacial activity in places where they shouldn't be according to standard models. The story acquires a gentle, memorable flourish when we consider the involvement of another famous figure. A short note of endorsement, or at least of interest, from Albert Einstein helped propel Hapgood's work into broader public attention. Whether you imagine a kindly old scientist examining a manuscript beside a warm fireplace, or a careful letter encouraging further analysis, the association lent Hapgood an unusual credibility. In the mid-century atmosphere of scientific optimism and open inquiry, even bold ideas found willing ears. But calm curiosity must also be paired with a steady lamp of critique. Science lives by evidence and repeatable explanation, and Hapgood's hypothesis, while evocative, raised practical questions about mechanics and likelihood. For one, the lithosphere, the rigid outer layer that includes the crust, is strongly coupled to the mantle below. The friction and mechanical interactions across that boundary are not trivial. For the entire shell to slide as a single unit would require overcoming huge forces. Geologists raise this practical point. Why would the shell suddenly become free to move? What mechanism would reliably weaken that coupling enough to allow motion on the scale Hapgood described? Moreover, many of the phenomena Hapgood highlighted can be accounted for within the framework of plate tectonics and climate variability across long timescales. The slow wander of continents, mountain-building episodes, volcanic activity, and glaciations. All of these can rearrange the face of the land without invoking a rapid global slip. When scientists examined the geological record, they saw layers of sediment, fossils, and chemical signatures that typically speak of processes occurring over long periods rather than the instantaneous planet-spanning upheavals Hapgood suggested. Yet history rarely reduces to binary verdicts. Hapgood's work raised questions worth asking. The presence of certain anomalous maps and coastal features remains intriguing, and geophysicists would later refine concepts such as true polar wander, which recognizes that the entire solid Earth, including crust and mantle together, can slowly reorient relative to the planet's spin axis. True polar wander is a real, measurable phenomenon, but it typically unfolds over millions of years and at gentler rates than Hapgood imagined. There are calmingly concrete examples where small, sudden shifts have been seen. Powerful earthquakes redistribute mass within the Earth, enough to spin the axis of rotation slightly, shortening the length of the day by microseconds and nudging the pole by centimeters. The 2004 Sumatra earthquake and others like it produced measurable, if modest, changes. These changes are not the world-ending wholesale reorientation Hapgood described, but they are reminders that Earth's rotation and mass distribution are not perfectly static. In fact, the planet is a living, changing system, always in motion, whether at the pace of continental drift or in the tremors of an earthquake. Hapgood's legacy, therefore, is twofold. On one hand, he triggered a line of thought that encouraged some to look again at ancient records, myths, and geological oddities, and ask whether the human story might stretch deeper than commonly thought. On the other, he served as an important cautionary example of how what begins as a curious synthesis of intriguing fragments must ultimately confront rigorous tests. Let us pause for a quiet moment and paint a sensory scene to anchor the idea. Imagine an old library in the late afternoon. Dust motes hang like galaxies in a shaft of light. You lift a brittle map, tracing with a fingertip a coastline that no longer exists. The ink has faded, but in its curves there is a whisper of other skies, other seas. Outside, somewhere distant, an arctic wind murmurs across a sheet of ice that has slowly inched across the planet's face. These images are romantic and soothing in their way, the calm of discovery, yet they also whisper of loss and erasure, of human stories interrupted by forces larger than any single life. In the context of our broader exploration of Dr. Chan Thomas, the classified manuscript and the possibility of cyclical cataclysms, Hapgood's voice matters. He gave later writers, including Thomas, a conceptual vocabulary, plates that move, poles that wander, ancient maps that might conceal truths. Whether one accepts his conclusions or not, Hapgood taught a useful lesson to careful listeners. Extraordinary claims want patient attention. They want not only narrative charm but also evidence and mechanism. As we drift onward, remember this gentle tension. Curiosity balanced with skepticism. It is a rhythm you can bring into sleep, the mind relaxed but still awake enough to notice patterns. Imagine yourself as a careful reader in the library of time, turning pages slowly, marking what makes sense and noting what requires further proof. Before we close this chapter, let me leave you with a quiet question to carry into the next. What kinds of evidence would make a rapid pole shift convincing? Is it the whisper of ancient maps and flood legends, or the deeper, layered record of ice cores, sediment and fossils? We will explore that together soon, moving from the thoughtful hypotheses of Hapgood to the kinds of geological and archaeological evidence scientists rely on to read Earth's memory, and a small promise to keep you with us. Later chapters will return to these old maps and legends, to the Piri Reis chart and to mysterious coastal outlines, and we will compare them with the physical record of ice, dust and ocean sediment. We will look at core samples and ancient shorelines, at the slow records of isotopes trapped in ice, and at the stories of people who survived floods and rewrote the maps in memory. Each piece will be placed gently on the table, one by one, so you can see the whole puzzle without feeling rushed. Settle deeper now, breathe slowly, and let the steady rhythm of your breath match the slow turning of the story. We will move gently through the kinds of evidence people point to when they ask whether great floods and sudden shifts really happened. I will keep my words simple and clear, and paint images you can feel in your mind. Chapter 3. Reading Earth's Memory. Ice, mud, maps, and stones. Imagine holding a long, clear rod of ice. Not the kind you put in a drink, but a cylinder drilled down from deep inside an ice sheet. In its rings are tiny bubbles of air, dust, and fragile clues. This is an ice core, one of the most patient and honest recorders of Earth's past. Each layer is like a year in a tree ring. There are layers for winters and summers. There are layers with ash from faraway volcanoes. There are thin bands of dust that tell of dry times, and tiny bubbles that trap the air people and animals once breathed. Scientists read ice cores slowly, with care. They look at the mix of gases in the bubbles and the tiny differences in the water itself. These little differences tell whether the world was colder or warmer in that year. Sometimes the layers change in ways that happen quickly, in just a few years. Ice can show sudden shifts in temperature, big storms, or times when the wind brought far more dust than usual. When we listen to ice cores, we hear a calm story of slow change, and sometimes a whisper of faster change. Now imagine a long line of mud laid down at the bottom of a quiet sea or a deep lake. Over time, sand and mud fall and stack layer by layer. If a wave from a great flood sweeps over the land, it leaves a different kind of layer. Sand and big rocks mixed with shells and pieces of plants. These thick layers, often full of broken things, tell of violent water moving fast. Geologists call some of these layers tsunami deposits, or megaflood deposits. They are like pages that show a wild chapter in a book that is otherwise calm. In some parts of the world, scientists have found these heavy layers in places where people once lived. Beneath towns, under layers of soil, and even under old stone walls, there are signs that a great flood rushed through long before written history. These filled layers can be dated using methods such as radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon is a simple idea. Living things take in a bit of a special carbon while they are alive. When they die, that special carbon slowly fades. By measuring how much is left, scientists can tell how long ago something died. This gives us dates for when a flood swept through, when a forest died, or when people left a place. A calm, steady clue comes from coral reefs. Corals grow up from the seafloor and leave their own terraces layer by layer. If the land suddenly drops or sea level jumps, the pattern of coral terraces changes. These terraces can be counted and dated. They tell of rising or falling seas over time. Where coral terraces end abruptly, it can mean something sudden happened, a quake, a flood, or a change in sea level. There are also places where great sheets of ice once stood over the land. As ice melts, the ground below can spring back very slowly, a process called isostatic rebound. The old shorelines and beaches that were once at sea level end up high on the land. Finding these raised beaches helps us see where the sea used to be and how the land moved after ice melted. These raised shores are quiet proof of a world that looked different long ago. Now let us look at maps drawn by people who lived before modern instruments. Some old maps show coastlines that look very different from how we see them now. One famous example people talk about is the Piri Reis map, made in the 1500s. Some say it shows parts of a southern land that might match the ice-free coast of Antarctica. If such maps are true copies of older charts, then they whisper that people long ago had seen coasts that are now buried under ice, coastlines that belong to a different world. But maps can be copied and changed, and sometimes map makers drew from stories or guesswork. Still, the idea that old maps might carry memories of vanished shores is a quiet, intriguing thought. Under the waves, just off some coasts, there are stone shapes that look like streets and walls. The Yonaguni ruins near Japan are a good example, a stepped, flat area under the sea that some say was carved by people. Others say it is a natural formation shaped by erosion. Either way, the sight of neat edges and flat terraces underwater makes the mind wander. If people once walked there, then the sea has covered a place where life used to be. That simple fact makes us feel both small and connected to long time. One slow, harsh clue comes from animals frozen quickly. The woolly mammoth is the most famous. In Siberia, scientists have found mammoths that died and were frozen so fast their food was still in their mouths. Some show signs of being in water, then frozen. How fast could that happen? The remains do not tell a full story on their own, but together with other signs they suggest times when climate and waters changed in ways that could be very quick and very cruel. We also have stories that travel in people's mouths instead of in rock. Flood stories are everywhere on Earth. In the Middle East, there's the story of Noah. In Central America, there are tales of great drowning. In the Pacific Islands, there are myths of islands swallowed by waves. When one culture after another tells a version of the same idea, it makes you pause. Is it coincidence or memory passed down? Oral stories change as they move, yet some keep a core image, a great flood that changes the world. It is tempting to gather these clues and draw a single dramatic picture. But careful thought asks us to weigh how strong each piece of evidence is and what other things could explain it. Ice cores show change, yes, but most often they show gradual shifts. Sand layers tell of violent water, but a big storm can do much damage without meaning the whole world is flipped. Old maps may hold traces of lost coastlines, or they may be imperfect copies and guesses. Stone formations underwater may be human work, or they may be the slow, patient work of the sea and weather. Another quiet point: the Earth keeps only some memories. Fire, water, wind, and time erase things. Cities built of reed and wood vanish. Stone can last, but it too crumbles. We live in what scientists call a biased record. Not everything that happened leaves a neat trace, and what does survive tends to favour some places and some materials. This makes reading Earth's memory like reading a house that has lost whole rooms to time. We must be humble. We must say, this is what we have, this is what it suggests, but we do not yet know everything. To tie these ideas gently back to our central question. When people point to ice cores, tsunami sands, drowned terraces, frozen beasts, old maps, and flood stories, they're collecting fragments that might point to sudden, large events in Earth's past. Put together, some of these fragments suggest major floods and big changes, but most of them also fit into slower known patterns. Ice ages, meltwater pulses, tectonic shifts, and storms. In other words, the evidence often says that the world has changed dramatically, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. But it does not by itself prove that the whole planet has flipped its poles in a day. As you lie back and let these images settle, remember how gentle and patient the Earth is. It keeps secrets in layers and shapes and tales. Our job is to read those layers slowly and kindly, without rushing to the loudest conclusion. There is beauty in the careful search, in holding an ice core, in walking a raised beach, in listening to the same flood story told in many voices. These are soft human ways of touching the deep past. In the next chapters we'll meet some of the specific sites people point to: the Sphinx, the Black Sea, lost islands in the Pacific, and look at the evidence for each one more closely. We will also take time to see how science dates events and how sure we can be about the timing. For now, let your breath match the slow rhythm of the planet's record. Patient, steady, and full of quiet stories. Chapter 4. Strange Places. The Sphinx, Old Maps, and Sunken Stones. Settle in. Breathe slowly. Let your body soften into the chair or bed. We will move gently through a chapter of quiet wonders, places that have made people pause, places that spark questions about our past. The words will stay simple, the pace unhurried, and the journey calm like drifting down a slow river. There are certain places on Earth that make people stop and look twice. They're not loud or busy, but they carry a strange weight, a quiet mystery. In this chapter we'll walk slowly through 3 of them. The Great Sphinx at Giza, the old and curious Piri Reis map, and the sunken stones off the coast of Japan known as the Yonaguni Monument. Each one carries its own story. Each one leaves behind questions. Together they weave a thread of wonder that we can follow, like taking a gentle stroll at dusk, letting the air cool and the sky soften. First, picture the Sphinx, a massive stone figure with the body of a lion and the face of a person, sitting in Egypt's desert for thousands of years. Its surface is worn, its edges softened by time. Some believe that the wear came from rainfall long ago when Egypt's climate was wetter. If this is true, it would mean the Sphinx is far older than we usually think, built in a time when heavy rains still wash the desert. This idea came into public talk in the late 20th century and caused much debate. It opened the thought that perhaps the Sphinx had stood watch over Egypt far longer than history books told us. But most Egypt experts hold to another story. They point to the way the Sphinx fits with the pyramids and temples nearby. They note that stone cut from the Sphinx's own enclosure was used to build those temples, meaning the projects were tied together. They also remind us that the stone of the Sphinx can weather in many ways, through wind, sandstorms, and Nile floods. To them, there is no need for ancient rainfall to explain the marks we see today, so the Sphinx remains balanced between 2 ideas. 1, that it is older than we think, and 2, that it belongs firmly to the time of the pharaohs. Either way, when we picture it, massive, silent and steady. It feels like a being that has watched endless centuries pass. Just thinking of it gives the mind a sense of calm and patience. Now let us drift to another wonder, an old piece of paper covered in ink, drawn more than 500 years ago. This is the Piri-Reis map, made by an Ottoman admiral who gathered coastlines from older charts. At first glance it looks like many maps from that age, but some details made people pause. Some thought the lower parts of the map showed Antarctica before ice covered it. This idea became popular with writers who loved the thought of lost lands and ancient advanced sailors. But when experts studied the map closely, they found that it was not so simple. The shapes match better with known coastlines copied and stretched, stitched together without precise tools. Careful studies show that the map does not truly fit the hidden land beneath Antarctica's ice, and that the idea of an ice-free Antarctica in recent human history does not hold up to science. Still, the map has its own quiet charm. The ink has faded with time. The curves of the coastlines are uneven, hand-drawn with care but not exact. You can imagine a sailor leaning over it by lamplight, copying what he had seen on long voyages, trying to give form to a world that was still new and uncertain. The Piri-Reis map does not prove a forgotten age of global sailors, but it does whisper of a time when the world was wide and full of mystery, when maps were as much dreams as they were guides. From paper, let us sink into the sea. Imagine clear blue water, and beneath it, a stone formation rising from the ocean floor near Japan's Yonaguni Island. The rocks form flat surfaces and steps, sharp angles and platforms that look, to some eyes, like old streets or ancient ruins. Divers swim through them and wonder, could this be a sunken city? Some scientists say yes, pointing to what looks like carved features and patterns. But many geologists explain the site as natural, stone that breaks in straight lines, shaped by waves and earthquakes over thousands of years. Nature, they say, can build patterns that look like the work of human hands. The debate continues, but the site itself is serene. To dive there is to see a stone staircase leading nowhere, steps fading into blue water. It feels like the sea is holding a secret, like a city asleep under the waves. Whether it is a natural wonder or a human creation long forgotten, it gives the mind the same gift, a sense of mystery, softened by the hush of the ocean. Across these three places, the Sphinx, the map, and Yonaguni, a soft thread runs through. Each makes us wonder if there was more to the past than we know. Each invites us to imagine old civilizations, lost lands, or hidden knowledge. But careful study reminds us that nature itself writes stories too, with wind and rain, with ink and copying errors, with stone and wave. Sometimes what we see is only half the story. The other half has been erased by time, and often both halves, the known and the imagined, carry their own quiet beauty. What these places teach us is not to rush. They ask us to slow down, to look closely at the direction of a groove in stone, the curve of a coastline on a map, the way a wave can cut rock into straight edges. They teach us to hold both wonder and reason in the same hand, to see what might be human work and what might be nature's slow craft, and to find calm in the space between them. As you picture them, let the images settle in your mind. The Sphinx glowing at dusk in the desert, the faded map resting on a wooden table, edges curled, the stone steps lying silent under the sea. Think of these as small stones you can hold in your hand, simple objects that carry quiet questions. They do not shout answers, but they steady the mind with their presence, and so we move on. Ahead lie other places, other stories. We will hear about floods and coasts that vanished, about myths that may hold fragments of truth, about layers of mud and shell that tell their own version of history. For now, rest in the thought that time is long and patient, and that the earth itself keeps secrets. Tonight you may feel small in that span of time, and that is a soft, gentle comfort. The world moves slowly, but it is always moving, always shaping stories. Carry that calm with you as we continue. Chapter 5. The Black Sea Flood. Tonight, we turn our calm attention to a single place that has felt like a memory to many people, the Black Sea. Picture a wide, slow sea hung between land and sky. Its water moves quietly, carrying the soft sounds of distant wind and the hush of waves on mud. Under that water there are shapes and lines that tell a story. These layers were covered by more mud and silt. If a large pulse of new, salty water came in, the tiny fossils and the chemicals in the mud changed. Freshwater animals and plants showed up below, and saltwater ones above. That change can be read like a quiet page in a book. Some scientists have found these signs in the Black Sea. They found ancient river mouths now underwater and soils that once held trees. They found layers that look like a sudden change from fresh to salty conditions. Pieces of old shorelines sit underwater in places where people would once have walked. These discoveries make the idea of a big sudden filling feel very real and close. For many listeners, this idea sings like an old tale, a lake turned to sea, a life suddenly gone under. Other scientists look at the same traces and read a slower story. They say the sea may have come in more gently, a slow advance as the global ocean rose after the ice melted. The careful rise could flood coasts gradually, letting people move inland bit by bit. The difference between a sudden flood and a slow rise matters a lot to our story. A sudden flood fits neatly with tales of a great, fast-delivered disaster. A slow rise fits with a slow, patient change that people plan around and survive. The truth may be a soft mix. In some places the water may have come quickly, in others slowly. The shape of the land, the heights of shores and the weather of the moment could all change how fast water moved in. Small gates or low passes would make it easier for a sudden surge to pour through. In other spots, sandbars and marshes could hold the water back for a while, letting it creep in. This quiet debate matters because many stories across the world speak of a great flood. The Black Sea idea has sometimes been linked to the oldest versions of those flood tales. Some people point to the timing and to the suddenness and say, this could be the seed of the Noah story, the seed of many flood tales. Others say that many floods happen in many places, and old stories often join and change with time. A single event might give rise to many versions, or many local floods might simply sound the same when told again and again around the kitchen fire. Think of the human side of this for a moment. A family living on a low shore in the warm light of morning gathers shellfish for breakfast. Children run along the sand. A river mouth glints. The people plant gardens and build small homes. One season the weather is odd. The rains. Skill is a slow kind of power. It survives because people need it every day. There is a gentle power in the way survivors pass on memory. Elders tell the children which river stones are safe, which fruit makes the belly sick, and which clan is friendly. The story becomes more than words. It is practice. In the long run, practice is what regrows a town. It is what teaches a child to tie a knot that will not slip in a storm. Practice turns fear into calm skill. Another thing that helps people rebuild is small acts of kindness. In every big change, neighbours share what they have. Someone with extra grain gives a cup. Someone with a warm shelter takes in a child. These acts are quiet, but they make it possible for families to survive winters after the storm. Over time, networks grow, trade routes, marriage ties, and shared rituals. The shared rituals, songs, dances, small offerings at a remembered spring bind communities together. Rituals keep memory alive in a calm, gentle way. The earth itself helps people find a way. After a flood, soil that had been buried can be very rich. Old riverbeds can be good places for new rice fields. Ponds may hold more fish. The land moves, but it also remakes itself. This slow recovery is a comfort. It tells us that even after great loss, the world can give again. When we look at the past, we sometimes find signs that many people may have known the same flood story. In far places, there are songs about a hard sea that came one night. The same shape of a story can travel with trade, with marriage, and with migration. This does not prove a single global event, but it does suggest many local events may have left similar marks on many minds. People across the world often use the same simple lessons. Watch the sky, help your neighbour, keep a small pack ready. For those who fear the thought of a sudden end, there is comfort in the human record. People fall, and then people rise. The world is large and forgiving in its own way. New forests grow where old ones burned. Rivers carve new paths and then slow. People learn new crafts and new songs. The record in bones and the same pattern. We know that the whole land felt the same climate. Sometimes tree rings match with records in ice or rock, and when they do, the story grows clearer. There are other clocks as well. Coral reefs grow slowly in layers and hold records of ocean warmth. Seashells buried in sand carry chemical hints of the water they grew in. Even bones of animals and people, when buried in the right way, can hold clues about diet, disease, and the age when they lived. When we place all these clocks together, a pattern emerges. The earth has indeed faced sudden shifts, but most are smaller than the stories in old myths suggest. There are floods, yes. There are volcanic winters when ash blocks the sun. There are meteor strikes that leave scars on the land and trouble the climate. But the story that the whole crust of the earth slid in one day, moving oceans and mountains all at once, does not yet show itself in these records. And yet, myths may still hold a grain of truth. A great flood remembered in song could be a real flood of a valley. A fire from the sky could have been a bright meteor. A sudden dark age in a people's history may match the time when a volcano filled the skies with smoke. Science does not dismiss stories. It checks them gently. Where stories and evidence meet, the truth shines brighter. To test these ideas, scientists do not rely on one sign alone. They check one against another. If ice records show a sharp change, they ask, do tree rings agree? Do sediments in the sea match? Do the ages line up? Only when many records sing the same note do we trust that note as truth. This careful way of checking makes science slow, but also strong. It does not leap at shadows. It walks step by step, candle in hand, through the dark cave of time. Some chapters in nature's book are still missing. Others are blurred. But the more we read, the clearer the picture becomes. And what does this picture tell us? It tells us that change is real. The earth shifts, sometimes quickly, often slowly. It tells us that people must live with this rhythm. It tells us that myths may be mirrors of real events, reshaped by memory. It tells us too that knowledge is power, but calm power. The power to prepare without panic, the power to understand without fear. As we drift deeper into the night, let this thought rest in you. The earth has always moved and always will, but within her movement is a pattern, a rhythm that can be read, and the more carefully we read, the more calmly we can live. In the next chapter, we will explore the forces inside the earth itself. We will look gently at the layers, the heat, and the push of ice, and see how these might make the world move. We will walk slowly through each idea and ask whether it is strong enough to carry the weight of the world. For now, breathe softly, knowing that time leaves its marks, and those marks are guides for us, not enemies. Chapter 10. The World. According to Thomas, settle your breath. Let your mind drift as if you were floating above the earth, looking down at oceans and continents spread out beneath you. In this chapter, we return directly to the voice of Dr. Chan Thomas and the pages of the Adam and Eve story. This is where his words grow most vivid, where he does not speak in riddles or hints, but in plain pictures of what he believed had happened before and what he thought would happen again. Thomas wrote that the earth does not simply turn in a steady spin, as most of us imagine. In his view, the outer shell, the crust that carries our cities, our rivers, our mountains, can slip across the softer layer beneath it, not in millions of years, not in centuries, but in hours. In his story, this shift is sudden and brutal. The world as we know it could tilt and grind to a stop and then begin moving in a new direction. What would that look like from the ground? Thomas paints the scene with raw force. He speaks of winds screaming faster than any storm we know, oceans rushing over land, climbing mountains, tearing away forests and cities, great waves not in one place but in many, as entire seas slosh out of their basins and pour across continents. In his telling, it is not one flood, but floods everywhere, joined with earthquakes and fire from broken volcanoes. He believed this had happened before. In his eyes, history is not a slow climb from caves to skyscrapers, but a repeating circle. A circle in which whole civilizations rise, build, thrive, and then vanish beneath water and ice when the earth shifts. Humanity, he said, has started over many times. Each reset wipes the board clean, leaving only fragments. A ruin here, a legend there, a story of a flood carried through generations. Thomas even gave details of how the event might unfold. He described the poles moving swiftly to new positions, ice caps breaking free and sliding into the sea, and continents thrust into new climates. Lands now warm could be locked in sudden winter. Frozen places could thaw into green valleys. It would all happen, he said, in less than a day. For him, this explained why so many cultures told of a great flood. He saw Noah's Ark, the sinking of Atlantis, and flood legends from Africa, Asia, and the Americas not as separate myths, but as shared memories of the same kind of cataclysm. Each culture remembered it in its own way, but the core, sudden destruction, followed by survival and rebuilding, was the same. Thomas did not stop at the past. He wrote as though the next event was not a question of if, but when. He gave no exact date, but he believed the cycle was certain. To him, the Earth's history was a wheel, and sooner or later, the wheel would turn again. He urged readers not to dismiss the stories of ancient people, because he felt they were warnings carved into memory, reminders that what had come before could come again. This is the heart of why his book was so unsettling. It was not just an old tale retold. It was a claim that our modern world, with all its technology, its cities, its pride, was just as fragile as any that came before, that everything we know could be swept away in hours, and that no wall, no army, no machine could stop it. And yet, in his pages, there is also a thread of hope. He didn't believe humanity was helpless. He believed that survival was possible if people prepared wisely, if they respected the cycles of the earth, and if they carried forward knowledge to rebuild. In this way, his story was not just about fear, but about endurance. Whether his words were science, speculation, or something in between, they have a haunting quality. They touch a part of us that wonders what lies hidden beneath myths. They remind us how small we are in the face of nature, but also how strong we can be when we adapt. As we move forward, we will look closely at the evidence Thomas pointed to, the legends, the fossils, the sudden climate shifts in Earth's past. We will hold them gently, asking whether they truly speak of a single, global event, or whether they are many smaller stories woven into one great tale. For now, breathe, and let his vision of Earth, fragile, powerful, endlessly renewing, settle in your mind like a whisper from another age. Chapter 11. Traces of a Lost World. Let your mind drift as if we are walking together through the ruins of time. Stones cracked by age, carvings worn by wind, bones buried beneath layers of earth. This is where Thomas turned for his evidence, not just to stories, but to what he believed were signs left behind in the land itself. He wrote about places where fossils are found in strange positions, as though animals were buried not by slow soil but by sudden disaster. In skill, did they thrive in a world before the last great upheaval? Were they heirs of knowledge carried through from an older age? Thomas didn't claim to know every answer, but he pressed the question. Had humanity been greater, then fallen, then begun again? He wove these clues together into a single pattern. Fossils frozen in ice, rocks out of place, flood myths across cultures, sudden deserts and jungles where none should be, lost cities with skills beyond their age. For Thomas, all pointed in one direction, that Earth's story is one of sudden repeating resets. It is important to pause here. Many scientists disagree with him, seeing other explanations for each clue. But Thomas's gift was not only in gathering facts, it was in telling a story where they fit together, where they became part of a living picture of the Earth as fragile and wild. This chapter in his book was meant to persuade, to show the reader that the ground beneath their feet carries more than soil, it carries memory. That in fossils, rocks and myths, we may glimpse what came before us, and perhaps what waits again. Let us breathe with that thought, that the earth keeps records not just in books but in its very bones. And Thomas, whether right or wrong, believed he had learned to read them. Chapter 12. Secrets, Classifications and the Hidden Pages. Now, let us settle in with quiet breaths, letting the darkness of night press softly around us. In this chapter, we follow Thomas's concern not only with the Earth's violent cycles, but with how those cycles, if understood, were treated by the world's authorities. He wrote as if the knowledge itself carried weight, as if to see clearly the shape of catastrophe could shake the minds of those who controlled nations. In 1966, Thomas's book, The Adam and Eve Story, came into the hands of those in power who considered its content sensitive. He claimed that his descriptions of the pole shift and the resulting for him, it was a reminder that powerful institutions may hold knowledge that ordinary people cannot touch, not necessarily out of malice, but out of a belief that some truths are too large to be borne calmly. Thomas believed this secrecy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, keeping the public from panic may have seemed wise. On the other, it meant that few could prepare or understand the patterns he believed repeated throughout history. In his book, he described governments and scientists observing unusual seismic activity, magnetic drift, and signs of flood-prone regions, yet little was shared with the wider world. Whether he exaggerated their inaction or not, the point he pressed was that knowledge could exist quietly in offices, while ordinary lives continued unaware. He also suggested that there were layers to this secrecy. Some papers were simply set aside, some reports filed under classified, some warnings left unsigned. The exact pages missing, he said, were not arbitrary. They included diagrams and explanations of the mechanics of the Earth's crustal shifts, the molten layers beneath our feet, and the speed at which continents could move. To Thomas, these were not abstract science. They were instructions in understanding survival, or at least the patterns that repeat. The intrigue of hidden pages gave the story a particular weight. It invited the reader to wonder, what is it that the world might not want us to see? Was it just the cataclysm, or the ideas, but carried the truth of survival? Yet Thomas went further. He suggested that even advanced civilizations, perhaps older than those we usually name, may have been swept away by such cycles. To him, the ruins of places like Tiahuanaco in South America or underwater structures near Japan hinted at knowledge erased by catastrophe. He believed that just as modern people often underestimate the power of the earth, so too might earlier societies have felt secure, unaware that the ground beneath them was a shifting stage. His descriptions of timing were not exact predictions, but rather patterns of intervals. He pointed to roughly 6,500 years as a repeating span between major upheavals, though he admitted the measure could vary. What mattered most to him was not the precise date, but the certainty that another shift would come. Just as the seasons move, so too did the cycles of disaster. Thomas imagined the world as if it carried a heartbeat, slow but steady. Each pulse was marked by upheaval. Glaciers melting, seas rising, mountains trembling. And between these pulses life flourished, forgetting what came before. He reflected on how fragile memory can be. After only a few generations, disasters become myths, and after a few millennia, they become unbelievable stories. It was this forgetfulness, he warned, that left humanity vulnerable again and again. In his softer passages, Thomas spoke almost like a teacher by the fire, urging readers to see beyond fear. If the cycles were real, then the point was not despair, but preparation. Communities could learn from the past, not only in practical matters of food and shelter, but in deeper lessons of humility. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are not separate from the earth. They live and die by its rhythms. He believed that if people accepted this, then each cycle of renewal could be gentler. Knowledge, instead of being buried and lost, could be carried forward. Seeds could be saved, stories remembered, and the wisdom of survival passed through time. It was not the end of the world that Thomas wrote about, but the end of forgetting. As night deepens around us, imagine the earth itself breathing in long, slow patterns. Imagine civilizations as waves on a shore, each cresting high, bright with life and brilliance, then falling back, replaced by the next. To Thomas, this was not tragedy alone. It was the nature of life itself, destruction and renewal forever entwined. Chapter 15. Human Choice in the Face of the Cycle. Let us continue with patience, as if following a stream that winds deeper into a forest. In the last chapter we lingered on Thomas's idea that the earth moves in vast rhythms of destruction and renewal. Now he invites us to step closer and consider the role of human beings within this great cycle. If the earth is bound to shift and change, what power remains in human hands? According to Thomas, more than we might think. Thomas was not writing simply to frighten people with visions of disaster. He wrote to awaken a sense of responsibility. He said that while the cycle itself could not be stopped, no wall, no machine, no empire could hold back the shifting of the crust. People could still choose how they lived in its shadow. He described choice in two ways: the choice of knowledge and the choice of action. The choice of knowledge was the most basic. To him, awareness was the first step towards survival. He reflected on how past civilizations, in his view, were caught unaware. Farmers in fertile valleys, builders of stone temples, and rulers of golden cities believed the world would always remain as it was. When the waters came or the ice swept down, they had no plan, no memory of what had happened before. Knowledge had been lost, and with it their chance to prepare. Thomas wanted the present generation to break this pattern. Even if governments withheld classified documents, even if scientists argued endlessly over details, individuals could still learn from the patterns of history. He urged readers to take myths seriously, not as children's tales, but as encoded survival stories. He believed every ancient flood story carried hidden instructions: save seeds, protect family, find high ground, build community. The second kind of choice, the choice of action, was for Thomas even more important. Awareness without preparation, he said, was like a lantern left unlit. He suggested practical steps, some simple, some ambitious. Families could store food and clean water. Communities could learn old skills such as farming, carpentry, and medicine made from herbs. Leaders could build shelters not only against war, but against the storms of the earth itself. He imagined, almost wistfully, a world where nations put aside rivalries long enough to prepare together, where resources spent on weapons might instead build strongholds for survival. He knew such unity was unlikely, but he described it as a dream worth holding. If the cycle of catastrophe was certain, then the measure of humanity lay in how it responded, selfishly or wisely, blindly or with foresight. Thomas also reflected on the moral weight of these choices. He did not write with scorn for modern people. Instead, he wrote with a kind of gentle sorrow, urging readers to open their eyes. He believed that by honouring these traces, ruins, myths, scattered artefacts, we could begin to see the fuller story of humanity, a story not of simple progress, but of resilience, survival, and repeated renewal. He also suggested that recognising these earlier civilizations was more than curiosity. It was a matter of preparation. If survivors of past cycles had managed to preserve fragments of knowledge, then we too could do the same. By studying what they left behind, we might learn how to carry forward wisdom into the next cycle, rather than losing it to time. As night deepens, imagine walking through those ruins again. Stones weathered by thousands of years, their carvings faint, their builders long gone. Yet through them, a message whispers, "We were here, we built, we lived, we endured." Thomas believed that listening to these whispers was not only an act of respect, but a way of remembering what is possible when the earth turns once more. Chapter 17: Survivors, Gods, and the Birth of Myth. Settle in once more. Let the stillness of the night surround you, the quiet hum of your own breath, steady and slow. In this chapter, Thomas turned his thoughts to a theme that has haunted human imagination for as long as stories have been told: the appearance of gods and divine beings after great disasters. He believed that behind these myths, to start fire without matches, someone who remembers how to purify water, someone who carries seeds in a pouch. To the eyes of children who survive, this person is a saviour, a god. They are not divine in truth, but their care, their knowledge, their survival is miraculous. This, Thomas believed, is how gods are born. In this vision, myths of gods are not only stories of the past, but also warnings and hopes for the future. They remind us that even after the greatest destruction, life continues, knowledge can be carried, and the human spirit endures. As you rest with these thoughts, let them settle gently. The idea that survivors become gods is not frightening, but humbling. It is a reminder of how fragile and strong humanity can be all at once. The next chapter will take us deeper still into Thomas's vision of what our own age might face, and how the echoes of past destructions might shape the choices of the present. Chapter 18: Warnings for the Modern World. Breathe in slowly now, letting your chest rise and fall like the tide, steady and unhurried. In this chapter, we return to Thomas's most pressing concern, the future. Not the distant, unreachable ages of myth, but the present world of cities, roads, machines, and fragile systems that support billions of lives. He asked, with quiet urgency, what might happen if the cycles he described, the sudden shift of the earth, the flooding and fire, the tearing of continents, returned in our own time. Thomas did not picture the future with calm continuity. He pictured it with sharp breaks, as if history itself were written in chapters separated by storms. He believed that the Earth's crust, floating on its molten layer, could slip again with little warning. Ice would surge from the poles into the oceans, raising waters, drowning coasts. Winds would sweep with speeds no building could resist. Lands now fertile would freeze, and deserts would bloom where rivers once flowed. For him, this was not just possibility, but inevitability. The next turn in a wheel that has spun for millions of years. He described in detail how modern life would be vulnerable. Cities clustered along coasts and rivers would be the first to vanish. Think of New York, London, Tokyo, Lagos, all swallowed by rising water in hours. Highways and bridges, built to last decades but not centuries, would grow, striking with those that warned of sudden change in the order of the heavens. The book of Revelation speaks of the stars being cast to the earth. The Norse Ragnarok tells of the sun darkening and the earth shaking. The Hopi elders warned that the world would be purified with fire before renewal. The Maya carved visions of cycles closing and new ones beginning. Thomas believed all of these may point to the same event, a pole shift, sudden and immense, bringing floods, fire and transformation. He even noted that some modern prophets, in their dreams and visions, speak of oceans rising, coasts vanishing, and skies burning red. While many dismiss these as fantasy, Thomas suggested that they might be the unconscious mind reaching into the patterns of the earth, sensing what science only measures with instruments. He urged his readers not to ignore them completely, but to weigh them gently, as one weighs the warnings of the wind before a storm. Thomas also reflected on the role prophecy plays in preparing the human spirit. Even if a vision is not exact, it awakens caution, humility, and readiness. When a prophet says a flood will come, the people may store food, build stronger shelters, or pass down warnings to children. For Thomas, prophecy was part of humanity's survival toolkit, not a guarantee of safety, but a nudge to stay awake, to respect the cycles of the earth, to never assume that the calm of today will last forever. But he did not stop there. He spoke too of the way prophecy can be silenced or ignored. Just as his own book was classified and hidden, so too, he believed, were certain visions kept quiet. He imagined elders who warned of coming change but whose words were dismissed as superstition. He pointed out that even in modern times, scientists who hint at sudden catastrophes are often sidelined, while those who speak of slow, gradual change are welcomed. For him, this was another kind of suppression, not malicious perhaps, but driven by fear of what people might do if they truly believed the earth could turn upside down in a single day. In his gentler passages, Thomas urged his readers to listen with open hearts to prophecy, not as doom, but as preparation. He suggested that the purpose of prophecy was not to terrify, but to guide, to plant the idea that after the storm, renewal always comes. He reminded us that nearly every prophecy ends with light returning, with a new earth, a new sky, a new age of peace. Even Revelation, with all its fire and thunder, ends with a vision of a renewed creation. For Thomas, this balance between warning and renewal was key. He believed that to hold prophecy rightly, one must see both sides. The destruction watched the skies change, and they sought words to carry those memories and visions into the future. And in those words, whether carved in stone, written in scripture or spoken by firelight, Thomas heard a single refrain: "What has been will be again." The cycles turn, the earth shifts, the waters rise, and yet always life begins anew.